All right, everybody. So today we are going to talk real briefly about finding the sculpture in the rough. And this is really key for an artist because really what we start out with is sculpt. I heard a post on Instagram and the guy talked about having artist eyes. And that's really an interesting statement because I never really thought about it that way, but it's very true. If we're an artist, we have artist eyes, which means we see the world and we see different pieces of equipment. We see different pieces of materials in different views than other people. And I just thought I would illustrate that real quick with something that I took and something that it turned into. Now, I am going to be fair. These aren't exactly the same materials. I had a scrap of silver poplar, and that's what I finished here. The raw chunk that you'll see is actually Russian olive, but it gives you an idea. It was a very similar shape when I started the silver poplar piece with the Russian olive piece, and that's why I'm using it as an example. So here we have the Russian olive piece, just a scrap piece of wood that was broken off of a bigger slab that I had. And here is the silver poplar piece that I finished to make a little pen holder slash twig pot vase slash weed pot vase, whatever you want to call it. And that's the key, is that I saw the potential for this in that. And that's really the difference between us as artists and though the perception of non-artists, right? And this gets to be a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing in the sense that we have that potential and we can see stuff and make art and add value to people's lives and whatever through the act of changing things from, like I said, this to that. Now, that all being said, it also tends to create a situation where we might be a little bit of a hoarder, such as all of that, which, of course, I see potential in every piece of that, right? Like, that's something that I can definitely see. But let's go a step further. I don't have as great of an example as I would have liked to have because I actually did some really cool abstract lithograph prints off of these stumps, but we're gonna make it work anyway. Okay, so let's start off with what I typically start off with for my stools and stumps and stuff. So, okay, we've got an ash log here, right? And that thing is full of potential. It's full of all kinds of stuff, but what do you do with it and what do you see in it is really what the question is. Well, then I start blocking it down. So you can see that I have cut off that side there. And that makes it where I can actually start to build a piece of furniture like a stump out of it or whatnot. And then it becomes something. Now, these are not ash, these are elm, but it becomes something like this, right? And that's still super, super rough. And I don't tend to leave bark on my stuff. It's just not my style. But I can see through all of that, right? I can see past the bark being removed. I can see all these rough chainsaw cuts being removed. I can see it being milled down and sculpted and shaped and whatever. And then eventually it will become something more along the lines of the stump that you saw this wood on that I was demonstrating at the beginning with. So let's look at that one more time. So then it becomes this. Oops, sorry. It's going to become this guy here. And you can see, like, I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's got like some texture that I put in it. As clearly you can see where I worked with the linograph, and that's all screen printing ink. the lithograph, sorry. And so, you know, I'm going to take all that back off. But you've got this beautiful texture in this wood. And now you've got this piece that when I get finished with it will make a beautiful end table or stump stool or whatever. Lithograph, there you go, Zevi. I can't speak very well today, I'm sorry. But it's, that's what it will become, right? And you have to be able to like cut through everything that's there in your mind and see what it will be. And that's going to be super different depending on what your style is. I'm not saying that you have to look through these chunks of wood and see what I see in them. That's not what I'm saying. But the difference is, like, my wife looks at that wood and she's like, wow, that's a lot of wood. What do you do with that? And she sees that and she's like, oh, that's amazing. I love that. So that's awesome. Another thing that occurs is that I get these scrap pieces that I make, and I make these three-dimensional sculptures out of them. And once again, it's the same concept. The scrap, a lot of people want to throw it away because it's in their way, and I understand that. But it can become something way different and way better. So you have to be able to see that with your mind. So how do you do that? Each person has their own way of doing it, and I can't say exactly how I recommend doing that. What I can say is I start to make an adjustment to whatever piece that I am working with, and then I adjust that and stop and look at it. So let's look at a piece that I have in the house, and we'll talk about a couple of aspects of that. So I'm going to grab this piece right here, and I'm going to bring it back outside for better lighting. So here's a piece that I've been working with and that I made out of pure scrap. All right, hold on. Let me shut this door and then I'll show you guys. So I'm going to turn the screen. Oh, it's not letting me turn it around. Okay, so I'll do it this way. So this right here is just a ton of scrap. This is an old piece of reclaimed barnwood that some kind of, I want to say that's a yellow pine. This is birch plywood that was an offcut. This is a piece of poplar. And then these are all pieces of oak and maple and walnut and mesquite and juniper, I think, is in there as well, that I found laying in my garage, and then I made something with it. Now, how I go about doing this is, like I said, I make small adjustments to it, and then I stop and look at it. So when we look back at this piece over here that I was showing you earlier, I actually just started sanding two sides of it. And then I was like, hey, that's got a pretty cool look, because just sanding it a lot of times will give you a different perspective. Like even this piece, if you were to just sand that face right there and this side face, you would start to look at this piece completely differently when they are finished, like when they are finished sanded. And you're going to start to perceive, and ideas are probably going to start to come into your head, right? And that's exactly what happened with this piece. When I picked it up, it was really rough and whatever, so I started sanding. I sanded the bottom first, and you can see it's got a weird, like, in the grain stain from a wax or something that's in the pitch of this, which is really strange. It's a stain that's in the wood itself. It's not from like oil or whatever, which you never know what you're going to find in wood. It's really strange. But I started sanding that piece, and then I sanded this piece of it, this side of it. So that side and then that side. And I was like, you know what? That looks pretty cool. And then I started sanding the other flats. And I just started off with all the flats first that were already part of this shape that I picked up off the ground. Once I had kind of gotten those roughed in and seen what was going on, then I started to like sand this side that had the bark on it till I got to just under the cork cambium there. And then I started to cut edges on it at angles that I liked, like that angle there, and this bevel on this bottom side there. And then I drilled holes in it for the purpose that I had, right? Because I was like, oh, that'd be a really cool, at first I was thinking a candlestick holder. Then I was like, oh no, I kind of like it as a twig pot vase or a weed pot vase, whatever you want to call it. And of course, I just kind of had that basic concept in it, and then I kept going with it. And that's probably the hardest part. We never know exactly what it is that we're going to end up with. And once we get started with stuff like this, it may be that we kind of feel almost like I'm wasting my time. Why am I doing this? What is going on with this? Is it really going to turn out the way that I wanted it to? Is it going to be worth the effort and time and realistically a little bit of money that we're putting into it as well? You know, that's always the challenge. However, I've found that if I keep going, there's this moment that whatever I was doubtful of kind of becomes more clear, and I'm kind of past the doubt. Now, that all being said, I may actually change the design of what I'm doing. It may not, you know, I may have started off with a different idea than that and then ended up with a different idea. The concept, the design may actually shift as things get sanded and whatnot. You may find you have to sand more off of something, and then at that point you are trying to balance, you know, what it can actually do for you. And that's important too, because like I've had pieces that I was like, oh, that's going to be a bookend, or that's going to be a candlestick holder or a pin holder. And then I found to sand it enough to get the textures that I didn't want out of it from saw marks or whatever, it didn't have enough of a base to stand. And that all of a sudden says, okay, well, I can't do that anymore with it. So what can I do with it? And then my mind starts to shift a little bit, and I start to create something different. And it's very reactionary to how the wood is working. When I am designing 100% to design something, that's a different story. I'm going to make sure I have enough wood, and I'm going to cut, and I'm going to do everything to make sure that it's going to be what I intended it to be. But when it comes to free forming things, you just have to kind of go with it. But once again, like I've said in some of my other videos, I find that even if it doesn't turn out to be what you expected, working these kinds of pieces of wood and or materials, it can be concrete, stone, it can be, you know, steel, it can be a lot of different things. What I found is that you end up learning lessons that benefit you in the future. So maybe this didn't turn out exactly like I wanted, but it still came out to be a beautiful piece that I really, really like. And now I have more confidence in the future of taking a rough piece and sanding it down and knowing that I'll get something beautiful out of it. So there's that lesson. Plus it helps hone your skills in sanding, in design balance, helps figure out what you can and can't push as far as limits go for vases or whatever it is that you like to make. Freestanding sculptures, pedestal sculptures, whatever. It also helps you understand that kind of wood. So if it's a wood, especially one that you have an abundance of and you use quite a bit, you'll find out, okay, this tends to split real easy if I work against or with the grain versus against the grain, or I have to be careful about drilling in. I really need to step my bits from much smaller to larger versus just going a little bit bigger to begin with, because the wood fiber can't handle that. It splits it apart. And yeah, you will ruin some things, but let's be realistic. If it's already just scrap or whatever on the ground, how much have you really lost? All you've gained is knowledge and a little bit of insight, and honed your skills a little bit to make it better. So yeah, I really hope you guys can relate to looking past the rough and finding the sculpture or art in that rough, because we have to bring it out. That's what we do as artists. And if we don't do that, your art's going to be much more limited, because you're always going to look for the perfect material, or you're always going to think about the perfect material. And the reality of that is it's going to cost you a lot of money, and it's going to be less available to you. And you may end up spending lots of money on something that you didn't end up liking the finish of anyway. So these kind of scrap projects like this really can hone your skills and help you add value to your art, whether it's emotional value or monetary value. So yeah, take a step back, look at stuff, pull out that sander and grinder, start shaping and honing, and just kind of see what you come up with. And I think that it'll make you a better artist in the long run. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for stopping by, and I will talk to you all in the next one. Take care.